Well, hello. Welcome back to Habit Helps, a podcast of Creekside Community Church in San Leandro, California, where we talk about how habits build you and about how you can build better habits. My name is Jeff Bruce. I'm a pastor here. I'm joined by John Bruce. He's a pastor here. We're related. I'm the son. He's the dad. Dad, how you doing?
I couldn't be doing better.
Yeah.
Niners beat Philadelphia, and Cal's going to a bowl game.
They're going to a bowl game, really?
All is right in the world, yes.
Is it the Chick-fil-A Wingstop, AutoZone.com Festivities Bowl?
It might be.
Okay.
It's the Independence
It's a classic.
Bowl I think it's in Louisiana.
Okay, the Independence Bowl.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, Texas Tech, so.
Yeah. No, I'm just still basking in the glory of Sunday.
I know.
It was just a good day. Very, very enjoyable day. And, right as the Warriors start to get bad, the Niners are resurgent. And, a lot in common between those teams, Dad. Very high ceilings for both. They just got to stay healthy and stay disciplined.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. They've got to, stay in discipline, stay in focus from game to game. And it's a lot harder for the Warriors because they've got a lot more games to stay focused on. And so we'll see what happens.
And, Dad, the reason I bring that up is because that's the situation of our listeners. High ceiling. Just got to get healthy, stay disciplined. That's why we have this podcast.
That's right.
Yeah. All right. I know. That was dumb. But we'll keep going now with our series, Smart People, What Proverbs Teaches About Building Habits. Proverbs is the wisdom book in the Bible. Biblical wisdom is all about skill in living. It's about small daily decisions that we make. And so Proverbs is a great book to look at if we want to talk about habits, because it shows us the vision of a wise life and then the small daily decisions, the habits we need to make to get there. So we've looked at a number of these habits that Proverbs would commend to us. And over these next 2 weeks, I guess last week and this week, we're talking about reputation.
Right.
So we talked a little bit about reputation last week and that smart people worry about they don't worry. They're concerned about their reputation.
Right.
They care about having a good reputation. They want to build a good reputation. So we had our first foray into that topic last week. We're going to continue that discussion today. So, Dad, where do you want to start?
Well, I think we started with Proverbs 25 because really the whole chapter is about reputation. So it's one of those rare chapters in Proverbs where you can see everything around one theme, and that's why it's so valuable. And so last time we talked about seeking excellence rather than fame and handling controversy constructively as two kind of major themes in the first 14 verses. And so I thought we'd just pick up with verse 15 and go from there and see what the rest of this proverb teaches about. I did notice that the final verse 28, is final verse?
It is.
Yeah, it says, like a city that is broken into and without walls is a man has no control over his spirit. And I think that's a great summary of this whole proverb. In Solomon's day, a city without walls was a city without honor because it was vulnerable to every robber baron and tin horn dictator and camel jockey that came through. And he says in the same way, a man who has no control over his spirit, has no discipline, cannot control himself, will be the same way. So Proverbs 25 really says your reputation reflects what's happening inside of you, making wise choices. And so continue to look at what are some of those wise choices that we can make and what areas we need to control, things like that. So, verse 15, by forbearance a ruler may be persuaded and a soft tongue breaks the bone. What do you see here in terms of reputation?
Well, I think it's connected to influence.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
And the way that we influence people.
Yeah.
And, you win more bees with honey.
Exactly.
Is sort of the idea, but that the words that people only hear what are selective in their hearing, and it's not just what you say; it's how you say it.
Exactly.
And if you want to have credibility with people, you have to be under control.
Yes, I think that's it. Exactly that. That word forbearance is literally length of anger. having a long fuse, being slow to anger. And I think it's just the opposite of what we think, is that when we want to persuade somebody, we want to come in with guns blazing, all of our arguments marshaled, and go for the quick win there. And Solomon says just the opposite. The most persuasive people take their time, listen patiently, speak softly and calmly, and because the soft tongue breaks the bone. Soft tongue is going to be a self-controlled tongue, is the most powerful tongue. As Proverbs 16:21 says, sweetness of speech increases persuasiveness.
It's an interesting dynamic because you think about what we're often drawn to in terms of listening habits, and there's a whole genre of people who just get angry to talk about things, right?
Yes.
Being angry on the radio or angry on
Yeah.
podcasts.
Yeah.
But inevitably, you think about, well, who actually listens to that?
Yeah.
Well, it's people who are angry about the same thing.
Exactly.
And it's almost a vent for their own frustration, and this person is just a mouthpiece for the things they already think.
Yeah.
So if you want to preach to the choir, anger is really effective.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you want to engage someone you disagree at, anger is one of your greatest enemies.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Because it will hijack your ability to think clearly, to be calm, and to actually achieve the end that you're hoping to achieve.
Yeah. You can intimidate people with anger, but you can't persuade them. Yeah. It's the old, he who was persuaded against his will is of the same opinion still.
Yeah.
And some people will back down and they'll act like they agree with you. But then when they go away, they haven't changed at all. So I think what Solomon is saying here, if you want to be persuasive, be patient, be rational, be self-controlled.
One of the points that Greg often makes, and it's a convicting one to me because I'm a parent, is that anger is effective at driving kids to the right thing, but it will not draw kids to the right thing. And so if your operating principle as a parent is to use anger or harshness to get your kids to do things, they will obey,
Yeah.
but they won't be drawn to the right thing.
Right.
They won't be persuaded, and ultimately it creates a rebel.
Right.
Because they were always driven,
Yes.
and never drawn
Yes.
to the right thing.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important principle in parenting. But of course, you can apply it to any other relationship. Where if your operating principle is just to use anger to get people to do what you want, that they, as you said, they don't actually want the right thing. They just want to appease you.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. So one thing we learn about reputation here is control your mouth, control your communication, control your anger. A second one is Proverbs 25:16. Have you found honey? Eat only what you need, lest you have it in excess and vomit it. And I think what Solomon's saying here is control your appetites.
Yeah.
We can't imagine a world without sugar, but that was the world they lived in, and so honey was a real treat.
Yeah.
And Solomon says that's great. Eat it. God created it to be enjoyed. Just moderate yourself, because too much of a good thing is a bad thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's challenging to apply that principle across the board, because you think about the amount of leisure time humans have now as opposed to previous generations. It's almost unimaginable to previous generations how much downtime there is now for so many people, or how much time could be devoted to technology.
Yeah.
And a challenging question would be like, what's your mental diet, not just your physical diet?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
We often think about this in terms of what we eat and substances we take in and moderating alcohol usage and sugar usage. And that's all great. You've got to learn to say no, but like, how much time should you spend every day looking at trivial things?
Yes. Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And not to say that all those things are terrible. It's just, is it 3 hours a day? Is that going to be your upper limit, or is it going to be 15 minutes?
Yes.
And I think that's it's harrowing or it's challenging, because then you actually have to decide. You're realizing I'm making a decision here.
Right.
So
Right. Now, as Paul says, all things are lawful, but I will not be controlled by anything. And I think this is one of those examples where everything created by God is good and nothing is to be rejected. But let everything be done in moderation.
Right.
That's the idea here.
Yep.
So if you want honor and influence, then you're going to have to control your appetites, because any appetite, no matter how harmless it seems, can ruin you if done to excess. I just think of my watching Cal, and there was a lot of years there I wasted a lot of time getting so emotionally upset whenever Cal got beat, which was most of the time, and it would distract me from other things I should be concerned about.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So how does that relate to reputation or credibility? I guess, is it just that it's hard to have credibility with people if you haven't made the sacrifices in an area that you would counsel other people to make? I mean, is that kind of the tie-in?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so. And it kind of comes out more clearly in the next one. Remember, a man like a city broken into without walls is a man with no control over his spirit. Mm-hmm. So anytime something else is controlling me, mm-hmm. I am lessening my influence on people. Mm-hmm. I mean, just think of it this way: who am I? I was famous, I was wealthy, I was very influential, and then I was discovered having an affair, and I lost everything. Yeah. Who am I?
You are many CEOs.
Exactly. I could be all kinds of people.
And pastors.
Yes, it's a common story
Yep.
where people sacrifice everything they've worked for.
Yep.
For one indulgence.
Yep.
That's the idea. Next verse is kind of along that same line. Let your foot rarely be in your neighbor's house, lest he become weary of you and hate you. And what's being controlled there, or not being controlled?
Yeah, I think what I think of is people who have nothing better to do. That's more what it is.
Yes.
So they're just around.
Yes.
And it's like they don't have a responsibility, so they'll just come and be with you. And you might enjoy being with them, but it's like I if I'm trying to get something else done or something like that, this is not a good time for me to be with you. So it's sort of, it seems kind of like the meddler, busybody kind of person who doesn't really appreciate other people's responsibilities or commitments.
That's it. Yeah, this person has nothing to do and decides to do it at your house.
Right.
And so people who can't control their time, will not be respected.
That's the principle, right?
So that's the idea there.
Yeah.
Here's another one. Proverbs 25:18, like a club and a sword and a sharp arrow, which were the weapons of war in Solomon's time, is a man who bears false witness against his neighbor.
Yeah.
So bearing false witness is lying in court, but there's other ways we speak against people, lie about people, hurt people by what we say, by spreading rumors and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I think if you try to create narratives around other people, that's probably the biggest one.
Yeah.
Because it's a control move in a way.
Yeah.
A person's character will become evident.
Yes.
and you don't always need to point that out to other people.
Yeah.
They can figure it out if they're a wise person just by being around them.
Yeah.
And so it's dishonoring to you ultimately to dishonor other people.
Exactly.
Like that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think be careful about talking about people behind their backs.
Yep.
Because it will always come back and bite you.
Yeah. That's called middle school.
Yeah.
As a parent, I'm living through that again right now.
Oh yeah.
It's,
Yep. Exactly.
Yeah.
Proverbs 25:19, like a bad tooth and an unsteady foot. If you've ever had a bad tooth you've bit down on, or a sprained ankle, you know what he's talking about. Is confidence in a faithless man in time of trouble. Oof. So I think what he's saying there is keep your promises. Yeah. Do what you say you're going to do.
Yeah. I think our listeners can all think of the person who they're expected to be somewhere, asked to be somewhere at a certain time, but you have this chronic anxiety in the back of your head that they are the person who will call last minute and cancel.
Right.
Just that they are always enthusiastic on the front end.
Yeah.
And often fail to execute.
Yeah.
when it comes time to do it.
Yeah.
And I think Solomon's saying, don't be that person.
Yeah, don't be that guy.
Don't be that person because it hurts other people. They're putting their weight on you.
Exactly.
They're expecting something from you, and then it hurts them.
Yeah.
When you fail to come through on your promise.
Exactly. As bad as if you had a bad tooth.
Right.
Or a broken ankle.
Yeah.
Or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think the biblical principle of swearing to your own hurt is very
Yes.
important there. To
Oh,
say
so much.
that one's always convicting to me that
Yeah.
if I agree to do it, if I said I'm going to do it, in almost every circumstance,
You do it.
unless there really is a true emergency,
Yeah.
you got to do it,
Yeah.
and you got to go through with it, even if it's not optimal.
Yeah.
And I think that's really hard for people in our culture sometimes to get because we want to optimize everything in life and make everything optimal. But
And it's all about our plan.
it's all about our plan.
Our plan is the most important. So
Right.
Yeah. Exactly.
I think a key principle there to go along with that is what Jesus says when he says, "Let your yes be yes and your no be no."
Yeah.
And the thing for me is to say, just don't agree to things quickly.
Yes. Yes.
Can I think about that?
Yeah.
Can I actually, because I think there's a pressure in the moment to be enthusiastic about something, to agree to something, just because we want to be nice to people.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it so often backfires on us
Yeah.
because then we agree to things and go, "Oh man, there's no way I can follow
Yeah.
through on that.
Yeah.
That's not realistic at all."
Yeah.
And so you got to learn to love people. You got to learn to say no
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
And that's a hard lesson to learn.
It is. It is. And yet, it's the people who say no, honestly, are going to be far more respected
Yeah.
than the people who say yes and then don't follow through.
Yep.
That's the idea. What do you think about this one? 25:20, like one who takes off a garment on a cold day, or like vinegar on soda, is he who sings songs to a troubled heart. What do you see there?
I think it goes back to influence
Yeah.
and the idea that some people they cannot grasp where another person is at.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And so they approach them in a way that is not effective and inappropriate given what they're going through. It's kind of the opposite of rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep.
Exactly. Just the opposite.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
So don't ignore people's feelings. People's feelings are important, is the idea here.
And I think it's challenging for people who are kind of chronic optimists and naturally joyful people. And I tend toward that as well, to really, because often it's not communicated through words, it's body language, it's seeing their countenance, it's seeing how they carry themselves to realize where are they right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then trying to mirror that as much as I can in the way that I talk to them. And it's not that I need to be their great comforter or whatever. It's just being like Jesus, accommodating us where we are, being accessible to us.
Yeah.
That's the principle there. And you cannot influence people without that sort of sensitivity to just their mindset and where they're at.
Yeah.
And that'll dictate whether they're ready to hear certain things or not.
Yeah.
Timing is a big deal in Proverbs. About
Very
when,
big.
It's not just what you say, but when you say it. too.
Exactly.
Yep.
Yeah. No, that's good. Okay. If your enemy is hungry, give him food to eat. If he is thirsty, give him water to drink, for you will heap burning coals on his head, and the Lord will reward you, which is even a better deal.
Yeah.
So I think what he's saying there is if you want to be honored, treat people better than they treat you.
Yep.
It's our culture is just so much payback, payback, payback. Don't let people get away with anything.
Yeah. It's called toxic, Dad. There are toxic people to get out of your life. And, and somehow they have this big label on them, toxic, right? And you've got to remove the toxic people, right? Because of what they do to us. And, Proverbs would just say there's lots of difficult people. You don't have to be their best friend, but you do have to treat them with kindness.
Exactly. Exactly.
Because how did Jesus treat you?
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. No, that's good. The next three all basically say the same thing.
Okay.
Stay positive. Proverbs 25:23, the north wind brings forth rain and a backbiting tongue and angry countenance. There's some people you can be around and you just get mad when you're around them because it's all negative. They're always complaining.
Yeah.
And verse 24, same thing. It's better to live in a corner of the roof than in a house shared with a contentious woman. And then finally, verse 25, like cold water to a weary soul, so is good news from a distant land. So you can be the bringer of bad news, or you can be the bringer of good news.
Yeah.
And people will respond accordingly.
Yep. I was thinking about those particular verses and that idea of contentiousness and complaining, and why do people keep doing it again and again and again?
Yeah.
And there's something almost empowering about, thinking, oh, there are problems that are so big that I can't solve, and I'm just going to keep talking about them.
Yeah.
And I think the challenging thing is to ask, is it that these things I'm complaining about, am I just complaining rather than grieving them, which is harder to do? Or is it I'm just not willing to do the painful thing to deal with it? It's just like, here's an option that'll be painful, or here's an option that'll be painful, but those are my only options for how to deal with it.
Yeah.
And it's about trade-offs, which is the better decision.
Yeah.
And to just be honest with yourself, and is it just that really I'm unwilling to make a decision, even though the decisions to make are clear?
Yeah.
Because there's no perfect solutions in life. There's just trade-offs.
Yeah.
And I can't think of a good example off the top of my head. Maybe you can, because you're better at illustrating things than I am. But you see what I'm saying? That you don't want to be the person who's just complaining about their life all the time. It's better to mourn over things in your life, which is harder to do.
Yeah.
Or to talk about, well, here's what I could do, this or this, and here's why I'm struggling.
Right.
It could be this, and that would be hard, or it could be this, and it would be hard. But that's a much more fruitful way to talk.
Yes. I think part of it is by complaining, you absolve yourself of responsibility for the situation.
Yep.
And I remember when I was working at another church, I would often get together with other guys, and we would just complain about things that were happening at the church, and all the stuff. And I think it was we basically in our minds were saying, well, I'm glad we're not like them. Yeah. I'm glad we're not compromising the gospel. Or I'm glad we're not worried just about our own, whatever it was, rather than really say, well, how can we solve this? How can we fix this? How can we?
Or what am I responsible to do, and how am I contributing to the sort of emotional climate of this system?
Yeah.
And then what do I have to do to make it better?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now I've been really convicted. It goes along with, I've been reading Failure of Nerve, which is an old leadership book, and I'm finally getting around to reading it. But basically Edmund Friedman, he was an interesting dude, but one of his big points is that leadership isn't about technique, it's about presence. And it's about being a non-anxious presence and a non-reactive presence, and being a differentiated enough and defined leader in terms of your convictions that you will take responsibility for things without instantly reacting to what everybody else is doing.
Yeah.
And there's a lot to that, but I think it's important to say that any culture, whether team we're on, we're always contributing to the emotion, what he calls the emotional system of what it is. And if it's one of complaining all the time because there's unsolvable problems, that will become paralysis.
Yeah.
Versus, well, here are the options we have, about how to deal with this.
Yeah.
And is it that we just don't want to do the hard thing because the cost is too high?
Yeah.
If one person is the common denominator in all these problems, well, then do we fire him? Well, we can't do that. Okay, then we work with him. Well, we can't do that. Oh, do we? Well, no, it's like, no, it's trade-offs. And then you have to decide, and again, it's absolving yourself of the responsibility of thinking through the hard decisions and the fact that you are participating in that emotional system.
Yeah, you're part of the system.
You're part of the system.
Yeah.
And the culture, and you are a co-conspirator in creating this system. And I think, and I would point the fingers back at myself and thinking about how I lead, that often in my mind anyway, I go to that state of learned helplessness.
Yeah.
Of just, rather than saying, no, there are options. And then once I've decided to say, no, it's a trade-off, and I'm willing to live with this issue and move forward with this, and then move forward and not complain. Does that make sense?
That's great.
I think especially if you're a leader in an influential position, it's so important to think like that, and not fall prey to learned helplessness, and learned helplessness is just I can't do anything about it, and I'm going to train myself to think that way.
Exactly.
That I can't do anything.
Yeah. Just before we move on to the next thing, I'd like the contrast of verse 25. Like cold water to a weary soul, so is good news from a distant land. Yeah. And you just think about times you kind of come home from work and you're kind of down, you're tired, stuff like that. You open the door and your wife or your kids gives you unexpected good news.
Yeah.
Just Dad, I got into college, or we just got a check. We didn't know we were going to get, or whatever that good news is, and how it just kind of lifts you and gives you all kinds of energy and completely changes your day just because that happened. And there are people that do that consistently. I just think of Kathy Greer. Kathy Greer was always happy and always had something.
The bringer of good news.
She was always the bringer of good news. It was just fun to be around her because she always could find something to rejoice in.
Yeah.
And so great contrast here between the bad news, good news people.
Yeah, and of all people, gospel people like us, good news people who think that we have the best news.
Yeah.
We should be the people who can see good news around us.
Absolutely.
And highlight it and point it out to other people to help shape their perspective.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's just lately I've been really focusing on the goodness of God in the Bible and just how much there is to rejoice in, just in life, and all the good things God does for us every day. It's been great. Here's another one. Like a trampled spring or a polluted well is a righteous man who gives way before the wicked. And the picture there is you're crossing the desert, you're low on water, you know there's a spring up ahead. And you just can't wait to get. You just almost taste that water when you get there. But when you get there, it has been trampled. There's been a herd of animals there, and left all the stuff animals. It's just polluted. And he says that's the way a person feels when they look to somebody to stand firm on what they believe, and that person compromises and gives way.
Yeah.
So I think just holding on to your convictions, regardless of the cost, being true to what you believe is very important.
Yeah, and especially if you have any sort of reputation that this is a Christian or this is someone with integrity or this is, I think one of the challenges is pre-deciding how you're going to think or respond in situations before you get there.
Yeah.
So if I'm asked about this or I'm asked about that, there's ways to respond with sensitivity and wisdom, but to say I'm not going to falsify my own convictions or preferences.
That's good.
Even if it costs me.
Yeah.
And to decide beforehand that's the case.
Yeah.
And that's really key before you get into those conversations.
Yes.
Because that's how you will give way. Because everyone thinks they have strong convictions until they're tested.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm ready to die with you, Master.
Yeah, you can't.
We see how that went.
I'm ready to die with you. Yeah, exactly.
Until a servant girl asks.
Right, until, I've never met him, right? And so, but that is a great cautionary tale. It is the cautionary tale about how we will give way when our convictions are tested.
Yes.
And so as much as you can, prepare beforehand.
Yeah, I think that's great, Jeff. I think that's a great lesson because those are highly emotional situations. Our mind kind of goes blank, and unless we've thought beforehand in a calmer situation, what do I really think about this? How would I answer this in a reasonable and yet true to Scripture way?
Yeah.
The likelihood of, sometimes the Spirit of God just uses you and gives you things you had never thought about before. But I think our responsibility is to prepare and to be ready for those situations so the Spirit can use those things. So that's a great point.
Yeah, I think they go together.
Yeah.
I do. And so the reason that the Spirit will he will bring words to remembrance.
Yes, we had to know them first.
You got to know the words, right? And before, so it's good.
Last verse. And this is a lesson we've talked about before, but we'll talk about it again. It's avoid self-promotion. He says, verse 27, it's not good to eat much honey, nor is it glory to search out one's own glory. And it is never a good idea to call attention to yourself and to what you're doing and what you're suffering and what, just to say things so you can people will think better of you.
Yep.
That it's not glory to seek out one's own glory, as I think Proverbs says in another place.
It's better be told, come up here, to be promoted than to promote yourself, to put yourself forward, and that's Reminds me of the Dunning-Kruger effect, that they studied, where there's a inverse relationship between confidence and competence.
Oh.
Have you heard this, right? So that people who are incompetent at something tend to have the most confidence about it. And people who lack confidence tend to have the most competence about it. And, and it's because the competent people, they realize how much they don't know about the area.
Exactly.
And the incompetent people have no idea how much there is to know, right? And so they assume they know everything.
Yeah.
And so it's just a great cautionary tale for us of just not going into expert mode, not promoting ourselves too much. Realize there's far more that we don't know about this thing than there's that we know. There's far less that we've accomplished in this thing that we realize. There's very little that can come from trying to promote yourself like that.
So true.
And there's much cost.
Yeah.
And it goes back to credibility. You want to be honest about who you are and what you bring to the table, and overselling yourself never works.
No.
In any situation.
No, exactly. Exactly. I always think of two words when I think about that: American Idol.
Yeah.
Because
with the Dunning-Kruger effect, the inverse relationship,
the
right?
people are the most they're blindsided when they're not picked. But I'm good. I'm so good.
My mom's been telling me that for years.
Yeah, and they're just awful. They're just awful. Anyway, that's beside the point. But. Well, this is good. I hope our listeners will see that having a good reputation is about self-control.
Yeah.
And controlling the right things and controlling the bad things too.
Right. Yeah. Well, thanks, Dad.
Thank you.
It's good. A lot about words here, and that's convicting because I have to listen back to a podcast then and go, okay, time to grow in self-control again. But thanks, and thank you, listeners, for listening. And, we'll be back soon, and we'll talk about something else. Not sure what, but, we'll be back at some point in the near future. So thanks for listening, and talk to you again soon.